Thank you. From my side, first off, a very warm welcome on this late Friday afternoon. I think this is a very important panel that we'll be discussing the future of hydrogen in mobility and transportation. Sustainability is a core topic for us here in Europe going forward. My name is Christiaan Hetzner. I'm a reporter with Fortune. I spent about 20 years here in Germany, the majority of it covering the automotive industry, so I have a very strong sort of personal interest in this subject matter. It's very near and dear to my heart. Just to back up for a second, I don't remember in the 20 years that I've really been living here, the subject of energy has played such an important role going forward. If we look, for example, at the European Commission's decision to move forward with carbon neutrality by 2050, I think we're the first continent to actually put this into legislation. This issue became even more important, obviously, with the invasion of Ukraine, where suddenly Europe was forced to scramble to secure supplies of liquefied natural gas and other energy, coal, gas, oil. As a result, we have now put ourselves in a position where we were sort of effectively extorted by Russia. We now need to find a solution, something that can bring sustainability to the economy going forward. And for that reason, I'm very happy to be joined by these three illustrious panel guests, where we can delve into this issue about what we need to do to make sure that fossil fuels are no longer part of Europe's future. So, for first, I thought we would start off with a brief introduction, an overview of the hydrogen market with Pierre-Etienne.
Thank you. So that's the easiest thing to do is to summarize the hydrogen issues in 3 minutes. So if you remember, maybe at least in France, when you were in gymnasium, you were looking at the periodic classification of elements, and you remember hydrogen was the lightest molecule in the universe, the most abundant, but also the most energetic. And the specific topic of hydrogen is that it's a secondary energy. You don't find it alone. It's always combined with carbon in hydrocarbons or with oxygen in water. That's very important for why we speak about hydrogen today. There are fundamentally three main reasons. The energy transition is about moving faster and faster into decarbonizing by electrification. It's a quest for a lot of renewable energy. And one of the big topics is that the best places where you can find gigantic amount of cheap, large renewable energy systems are not always the places where you need it. The places where you need it and that don't have enough are typically Japan, Korea, and some of Europe. So you need a vector to transport that renewable energy into those places. And that vector, without entering into details, is going to be hydrogen or hydrogen rich. You're going to pipe hydrogen, you're going to ship it in the form of ammonia, and that's a way to access massive amount of renewable energy that you need for fuel. Second, in many places you need to manage intermittency. Directly, you need to store your energy for a couple of days or weeks when the share of the intermittent energy in your grid is becoming very important. And for that, batteries do not make the work. You need to use a better system, which is hydrogen, because hydrogen as a gas can be stored more easily. And third, which is fundamental, of course, is that you then need to decarbonize your downstream sectors. And you've got a part of it which is decarbonized very well with electrons, what we see with the light-duty vehicles moving to battery electric. But when you speak about heavy-duty, intensive mobility, very heavy weight to transport, then you need to hybridize with a better density of energy which is brought by hydrogen. And next, heavy industries, steelmaking, cement, glass, pulp and paper, of those very intensive heat consumers cannot be replaced by just electrons. They need a fuel source with low carbon which is rich in hydrogen. That all makes that the Hydrogen Council, the World Hydrogen Council, and then many other national councils have done a lot of studies on what's the macro vision for hydrogen in the future. And the end game is that energy tomorrow will be a lot of electrons and 15 to 20% of hydrogen in the energy mix, with specificities by each country, but maybe Katherina will say more on that. So that's why hydrogen is basically everywhere in the future, and that we need to accelerate in pushing that up into a massive source of clean energy.
From your experience, scanning this market as an investor, can you talk a little bit about the challenges that you see in terms of scaling it in size? There was an executive from one of the Danish companies that basically had said, look, we need to do in 2 or 3 years what the wind energy industry has done in 25.
Yes, but what he doesn't say is that in the last 20 years, the renewable energy achieved a reduction of cost by 10 to 15, which is absolutely gigantic. For hydrogen, we need to scale, but the cost achievement that we need to do is basically 2. So it's far less. But we need to go far faster. That's the topic. Now, the technologies are all ready. I think Christophe will explain on the fuel cell side. On the electrolysis side, it's a very, very heavy and very old technology. The only issue is to make it bigger. But the first large-scale projects have been deployed, 20 megawatts. You will have roughly 5 gigawatt worth of projects that are going to start in the next 3 years in Europe. And there's no major challenge. The issue is just not to overrun CapEx, which is normal for a first type of project. The manufacturing capabilities to do electrolyzers themselves have moved from less than 1 gigawatt in Europe to 20 gigawatts. So the dynamic is there. And then the volume will make the cost go down. So I don't think scale is the issue. The issue is to find the right offtakes. And that's a question of where are you going to use the hydrogen and who pays the premium, which you have at the start.
Thank you. Katherina, you wanted to talk a little bit about the policy angle, for example, what we can look forward to in terms of Europe versus other countries. You have a background in government. How do you see Europe in the sort of competition for scaling up hydrogen?
First of all, Etienne mentioned an important point. Hydrogen is a global topic because globally we agreed to the Paris Agreement that we want to have our economies carbon neutral. That means there is a global race who does this in the most efficient way. When it comes to Europe, we had a period of time, I would say 1 year ago, where we had an advance of 5 or 6 years due to a smart regulation, due to the ideas of IPCEI's important projects of common European interest, where the Commission put a lot of money in. But what I see is that we lose time. Regulation tends to organize the last very piece, to be very precise, and not to set the framework. And here, last summer, the US government, the US Congress, put a really important pledge. The Inflation Reduction Act will change the whole game. What is the Inflation Reduction Act? The Inflation Reduction Act, in its core, it's a very protectionistic package. The US government said we put a 369 million fund, both taxes and credits together for 10 period of time to produce renewables, batteries production, hydrogen infrastructure to shape really a new world. And to have a period of 10 years, secure and very simple tax credits. Every company can do this and every official tax unit can do this too. A 10-year of a very simple framework. And I think that is a wake-up call for Europe also to rethink our regulation. The State Aid Act limits public funding just to CapEx production. As Etienne explained, CapEx is one thing. The OpEx over the period of time, it's a second thing. Of course, hydrogen right now, to produce it in a green or blue way, is pretty expensive. So just to invest in the electrolyzer or in one combustion engine doesn't cover the whole process. And here the US acts really smart. They invest in CapEx and OpEx, and you can combine every single piece. So first, my request to the European Commission is to reduce complexity, make things more simple, and think big. Think big. There's a kind of idea, I would say, nearly ideology, in Europe and also for good part in Germany, that hydrogen will remain just in few amounts, will be a scarcity. And I don't see this. Right now, there is just few hydrogen, and the offtake market is limited. But I see a really increase, a dramatic increase, and that's why we shouldn't think about how to put the few hydrogen in which sector and in which company, but really open the offtake market. And what is the offtake market? It is mobility. There's small and medium-sized companies in Germany, for instance. Our industrial core in Germany is the small and medium-sized companies. 99% of all companies in Germany are small and medium-sized. But that is still the technological and the industrial core. These companies need high process gas, glass, cement, copper, aluminium, steel, but not only ThyssenKrupp, but even smaller ones, paper, all high caloric gas processes. Here we have to have hydrogen, and one big advantage we have in Europe, and we should really take care of it, and that is our infrastructure. We have the most advanced gas grid throughout Europe. So Steffi is all the time calling for Europe. So we have here really a system what connects really every single part of this continent, high capable and ready for H2 takeoff. And so when you ask me what we should do, take care of our infrastructure, ports and gas grids, and make the state aid as simple as possible.
Christophe, as far as sectors are concerned, Katherina was just talking about glass, cement, steel, the classical industries where it's very hard to abate CO2 emissions. You're focusing on fuel cells in a mobility application, so certainly long-distance haulers that transport goods over very long distances, but also, if I understand this correctly, passenger cars, where I have a bit of skepticism. Perhaps you could explain.
Yeah, so maybe, hello everybody first. Very quickly, what is a fuel cell? A fuel cell is a small electrochemical reactor that takes oxygen and hydrogen, produces electricity and water. So it's a way to produce electricity from hydrogen. And if that hydrogen has been produced, in zero-emission fashion with renewables, in some countries, they might also take nuclear. This is a zero-emission electricity that you can use to power typically cars or vehicles overall. So why fuel cells for mobility? Because more and more there's a recognition that batteries alone will not do the job. Basically, we have seen, a ramp up of electric mobility with batteries, but clearly for use cases where you need to transport heavy material over long distances and where time is of the essence, so typically the time of recharging matters, there hydrogen has a play. And so we believe that hydrogen fuel cells in particular, who have the highest efficiency as a system for vehicles, will have a share to decarbonize mobility. So that's my first point. Now, the second is we have reached a tipping point because hydrogen has been up and down, and we've been talking about hydrogen. And in the early 2000s, we thought it would take off, and then actually it was batteries taking off. Now, why a tipping point? Because, as Pierre-Etienne and Katherina mentioned, more and more industries that are already using hydrogen today, gray hydrogen, so meaning hydrogen that has been produced from natural gas with lots of CO2 emissions, are coming to a point where they say, I need to decarbonize, so I need green hydrogen. So we will have green hydrogen available in massive amounts, thanks to the IRA, thanks to new technologies in electrolysis and so on. And we are kind of piggybacking, mobility will be piggybacking on the efforts of the industries that need that green hydrogen. And this will allow hydrogen mobility, and in particular fuel cells, to take off. The technology is also much riper than it used to be 10, 20 years ago. We're talking about cost. Costs are coming down very quickly. And a number of players are taking positions. Clearly today, I think it's safe to say, technology leadership is probably with Toyota in Japan. Hyundai is making huge efforts. I think outside you will see BMW, who has been working persistently on fuel cells. And there are a number of others, typically Stellantis, who has been investing in us. We are a fuel cell technology provider. So you have more and more OEM players that are positioning in that value chain because they understand that, for their heavy-duty pickups, for light commercial vehicles, for buses, coaches, and trucks, again, battery alone will not suffice. So passenger cars typically, I don't believe will go fuel cell, except for maybe the SUVs, confer, the BMW case. But in all those segments, you will see varying shares of hydrogen. And actually what we believe today, just to have a couple of numbers, today there are roughly, between 50 and 100,000 vehicles on the road. A lot of them in California, Japan, Korea, not so many in Europe. By 2030, we think there will be between 1 and 2 million vehicles produced globally, and this is just for on-road. But think of also, trains, think of ships, think of other off-road construction vehicles and so on. All these need to decarbonize. And again, there's weight, time is of the essence, there's distance, and so fuel cells will have their play here. Now, what do we need? Clearly, we need, first of all, industrialization. The technology needs to further mature, and we need to massify the role of that technology. The IPCEI, so the important projects of common interest, have done a great job there. It has taken a long time. I think the European Commission could have been faster, but in the end, it's been great to basically get this funding to innovative players. Second, we need infrastructure. Today you have about 200 recharging stations across Europe. 100 of those are in Germany, by the way. We need several thousand for those millions of vehicles by 2030. And third, and probably most importantly, you actually need a competitive hydrogen price. And there we're back to the question, how to get the hydrogen price down. The US are leading the way. I think Europe needs to think about ways to get its hydrogen price down quickly as well to stay competitive.
What about the other side in terms of CO2, the price of CO2 per ton? This is becoming an increasingly important issue. We're looking, for example, at the carbon border adjustment mechanism. There are various estimates about where the CO2 price for an emission right is going to be in 5-10 years. So if we look at it from that perspective, certainly fossil fuels should be becoming more expensive over time. So when do you think we will reach cost competitiveness for hydrogen?
So actually, we have done a lot of TCOs. TCOs means total cost of ownership studies to understand, if you are the owner of a truck, you operate that truck for, certain routes, you transport certain products and so on. What's your overall life cycle cost for your truck? And what we believe is sometime between 2025 and 2030, there will be actually cost parity between diesel trucks and hydrogen trucks. Mm-hmm. And today, to make it again very clear, today, if you buy hydrogen at the pump in Europe, you will pay somewhere between, let's say, 12 and 15 euros, sometimes a bit more, per kg of hydrogen. We think this needs to go down to maybe 7. So this is the factor 2 that Pierre-Etienne mentioned. And with hydrogen, 7 euros, plus the cost roadmap that we guys have, to bring the cost of our technology down, you'll be there. And from that moment onwards, this will roll by itself.
That's a very important point.
If I may.
Of course.
Today, factually, in Europe, given the crisis, green hydrogen done in Spain is cheaper than grey hydrogen done with natural gas.
Green hydrogen
of course,
in Spain?
far cheaper.
Cheaper than grey hydrogen. Grey hydrogen.
I'm not selling anything. That's just factual. If you do your asset in using solar energy in Spain, it's going to be cost per megawatt hour will be maybe 20-30 euros. The marginal cost of producing hydrogen by electrolysis will be basically 1.5 euros. You have the capex, you are 2.5. Grey hydrogen, given the fact our system is moving into LNG-based pricing, is going to be probably in the range of 5 or 6 euros today. It's not going to stay like that because we will fight against the Ukrainian situation. But they are really reaching same level now.
For those that may not be familiar with the term, gray hydrogen is produced with a fossil fuel with natural gas. That's the feedstock, and it is not sustainable. Katherina, you had mentioned earlier the IRA in the US. I'm American. I spent half my life there. When I think about what can happen in 2 years' time at the next elections, you know, my immediate thought is what happened when Trump rolled back the US's commitment to the Paris Climate Accords. So what makes you so confident that the Republicans, should they take power in 2 years' time, won't do the same?
Well, first of all, as I said, the IRA in its political heart is very protectionistic. The EU Commission thought about going to the WTO and start to negotiate. So, and when it comes to protectionism, excuse me please, but then between the Republicans and Democrats, I think they will meet there at this point. Okay. Second, it's not only funding some parts, they build up a whole new industry and will deliver energy which other regions desperately need. We have a desperately demand of energy. Mm-hmm. The transition of a whole economy towards either electricity or hydrogen needs huge amounts of energy. And Europe itself won't cover the whole demand by itself just to have it from renewables. Our friends in France will solve the whole thing with nuclear.
And I'm not solidarity with them on that one.
No, that's fine. And still, there will be import need. Mm-hmm. And what we learned from the crisis we have now, you can't count on one partner and on one energy source. You have to diversify yourself. And what is a critical point for hydrogen? Hydrogen will produce there where renewable energy is cheap. And that is in windy regions or where it's very sunny, where you have plenty of space, and there will be hydrogen or the derivatives will produced. And that puts America, that puts North America at whole in a very interesting position. Mm-hmm. So we have to speed up in investing in renewables. We have to speed up in investing in infrastructure. That is grids, that is terminal, but it's also fueling stations. And we have to have a right framework. Why the right framework? Right now, for instance, in mobility, everything is going towards electricity. I totally agree to everybody who wants to say, in cities we will drive with electric cars. But that's not the only case. So regulation should open for as much as technology as possible, and the one who is market competitive will win. And we have different options. To set on one, just electricity or just electric vehicles and just heat pump in buildings. That is wrong. We need options, we need diversification, and I think that is what we have to do right now.
On that note, one thing that I think oftentimes is neglected, we talk about it very often in terms of environmental aspects, but there's also an economic benefit. We free ourselves from importing fossil fuels, which is a drag on our GDP. We create jobs here, invest in our own communities. Is that something, I mean, could you talk a little bit about, you know, what kind of impact that could have for Europe's growth?
In fact, if you make the comparison of what Japan and Korea and Germany are doing, all those countries were the first ones to move into hydrogen because they don't have enough energy in their territory. And the only way for them to get a clean energy is to import them in the form of hydrogen or ammonia, which is, let's make it very similar to hydrogen. And Japan and Korea, they're going to co-fire their coal plants with ammonia to reduce their emission and progressively use those assets but become low carbon. For Germany, this is exactly the same topic. So with that, not only you're finding a way to keep your assets, but you're progressively decoupling your needs on your dependency from the coal imported from Russia. Same for the gas and same for the oil. So if you see that long term you need to get rid of oil and gas, you need basically to replace those with either electrons or molecules. And the only molecules that can replace gas or oil and has the same kind of energy energy density or energy capacity is hydrogen or hydrogen-rich fuel. And I think this is exactly what Germany is trying to do. In fact, France does not disagree. Just France says that they believe that nuclear can make the job, but nuclear today is a little bit too expensive and not completely reliable. So that's a small topic. But yes, if you tomorrow shift into electrons plus hydrogen, a lot of renewable done offshore Europe, some windmills onshore, but it's difficult, it's taking a lot of time, and you add to that access to many different sources where your renewable is very cheap, piped from North Africa, piped from Northern Europe, piped from Eastern Europe, or shipped from Australia, like what you've done with E.ON, then you have a versatility of access to clean energy, which basically is a way to restore independence.
From my side, one final question. The one thing I'd sort of take away personally is that there really is no other alternative to oil and gas than the hydrogen over the longer term. But perhaps starting with Katherina and going down the line, what would be the one message you want everyone here in the audience to take away?
The message is that we need electrons and molecules also in future. Today we have a share of 80% molecules and 20% electrons. That will be 50-50, but it has to be all green. And that's why we have to be open, we have to be technology open, and we have to be optimistic. Maybe that is the most important message. We Germans tend to ask and create problems where never have been a problem. So I think to believe in our competencies, believe in our engineers, and believe that we can solve the energy crisis with new technology, I think that's the main takeaway from this year.
We should all have a can-do attitude. Pierre-Etienne.
I will not agree more. I would just add that this is really the next energy revolution that we're living with hydrogen. And Europe,
could you repeat that?
It's probably the next energy revolution that we are currently living. Mm-hmm. And Europe still has a chance to win. So the only thing is to adjust the governance to be far more faster into implementing policies.
Europe has a chance to win the next energy revolution.
Yes, I think we can.
Yeah, I'd like to insist on that because this is really important. You know, if today you ask yourself, where do the batteries come from that are in my electric car or in my phone or wherever, very likely, you know, they will come from China, Japan, or Korea, because this is where the leading players in batteries are. So the Europeans are trying to catch up, but it's a tough fight. I think in hydrogen technologies, be it electrolyzers, fuel cells, Europe still has a chance, you know, to take a leadership position. I think the cards are on the table and the positions are more open. But there's time to act. The time to act is now. There are very innovative companies all across Europe in those sectors. So let's make them blossom. We try to do our share at Symbio, but there are many more, and we need to grow this ecosystem.
Yeah, I used to write about Siemens Energy, which has one of the first projects for green sustainable hydrogen in Chile. They partnered with Porsche, which is going to be buying at a very high price, of course, initially synthetic fuels based on green hydrogen, but also there's ThyssenKrupp Nucera here in Germany that is in alkaline water electrolysis. And that's another important aspect of this equation. So we have the know-how here in Europe. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. I hope you all come back with some rather important points about what hydrogen means for Europe, for our growth, for our own economy and jobs here. Many thanks.
Thank you.